when we started live streaming last week, there was all this chatter. We'll just wait.
I didn't criticize you, did I?
No, you, what was I even talking about? Oh, no, I feel...
All right, is all the councillors up? Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the April 20th special meeting of Council. I'd like to first recognize that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk today will be Ms. Sheila Gurry. Today's special meeting of Council will be held in accordance with the Community Charter, Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272, and Ministerial Order number M083. Therefore, members of the public are required to observe meetings virtually and not attend in person. Question period will be suspended throughout the duration of this order being in effect. Council will be attending via Zoom at these special meetings, maintaining physical distancing at all times. Members of staff that are partaking in the meeting will be spread out in the boardroom as they are. And the first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Your Worship. So some additional late items as well. We have added on the addendum the 2020 parking operations report titled 2020 Parking Fee Relief. We've also added property tax due date, and we've also added Mr. Kim Smythe, President and CEO, Nanaimo Chamber of Commerce, to speak to the correspondence that was on the agenda. As well, we're going to renumber. We're going to have the correspondence item E be the new A, and Mr. Smythe, if Council agrees, would speak first. The new B would be what's currently C on your agenda, which is 2020-2024 Financial Plan and Property Tax Options. The new C would be Property Tax Due Date. The new D will be 2020 Parking Operations, and the new E will be City Facility Leasing and Rental Relief.
Thank you very much. Unless anyone has something else to add to the agenda, I would ask for a motion to approve the agenda as amended substantially. Moved Councillor Markman, seconded Councillor Turley. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. We have no minutes to adopt. The Mayor's report, I have nothing of any spectacular nature to say other than to the citizens who are listening and to the city staff who continue to keep working for us. Thank you as we work our way through these times. I think all of us are finding some joy in new routines and activities that we haven't engaged in. I've never seen so many people in my neighborhood out walking and getting exercise, and that's not with dogs either. So there's a positive aspect to it, but I know also at the same time, my daughter sent a notice to me today of a business that she patronized that has announced they're closing their doors for good. And what that tells us is that not everyone in this community is having the same ability or has the same ability to survive the economic downside of this crisis. And so to those folks, I want to emphasize again, particularly with the presence of Mr. Smythe on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce, I want to emphasize again that where you can and by whatever method you can that sticks within the COVID guidelines around physical distancing and washing your hands and all of those things that are so crucial that are helping flatten the curve, within the context of that you do everything you possibly can to support those businesses that were a part of your life a few months ago, and we hope to will continue to be part of our lives in the months ahead. They are our friends and neighbors, they are our family in some cases, and they deserve and need our support in ways that we never anticipated, and I hope all of you will continue to step up to the plate as you have done. So I just, on behalf of Council and on behalf of those businesses and people who need your support, say thank you. Let's continue to do so. We have no consent items, Ms. Gurry, so we will move on to Mr. Smythe, who is item A, correspondence dated April 16th regarding Business Community Roundtable COVID-19 discussion results. Ms. Gurry?
Stand probably right, maybe if you could just move your chair a little bit, Your Worship, and then you could stand there so that the camera can catch.
Yes, step in a bit. then we can see you on.
Oh, there I am, yes, I see.
Yes,
I
you're
think I'm better further back. I'm probably more in camera range, or I could drop to my knees, but an appropriate move during a council meeting. Thank you very much, Mayor and Council, for having me here under these weird but very special circumstances. I'm certainly appreciative of the fact that I am being permitted to, and you have extended special circumstances during the special meeting to have me attend and speak. I am indeed here to address the letter that the Chamber wrote last week regarding the business roundtable held last week and the outcome of that meeting. In this letter, I, of course, thank you for the work that you've been doing to this point in time. Thank you for your consideration of staff and workers of the city in terms of keeping them safe by locking down facilities, by locking down this facility, by continuing to maintain the business of the city by relying on virtual methods of doing business, and by maintaining your presence in the community as well. And thank you to you and for Councillor Thorpe for attending the webinar that we conducted last Friday on work being done at the municipal level. Of course, it's agreed, and in your opening statement, acknowledging one business that had gone out, has gone under officially now, but in retail and service, of course, thousands are out of work, businesses are shuttered, trade and transport has been brought to a standstill, and the service sector, especially personal services, are at a real standstill unless you're considered essential. We hear stories about a woman who opened a new business downtown on Monday, middle of March. On Wednesday, Dr. Bonnie Henry addressed the fact that personal services needed to shut down. She wasn't in business 48 hours before she was ordered to close. A brand new business, we can only imagine where she will be when her May rent becomes due, and she hasn't had probably customer number one, paying customer number one, because you're going to do all your friends and family's services first. So really expecting, unfortunately, more bad news similar to that rolling out over the coming weeks. Tourism and hospitality operators are likely to write off their entire year, and many will cease business operations altogether. Value of this industry to our local economy is immense and priceless. The loss is incalculable at this time. Things have happened too quickly. People were shutting down hotel facilities within days of the first announcements back in the second week of March. And one of our members, a large local property, whose name I won't mention, but you can probably guess, addressed to me that she had written off $300,000 worth of business in 3 days. This is business that won't come back when we come back. This is business that is gone. A lot of those are conferences and conventions and meetings that are booked 1, 2, 3 years out. We're done, we're gone. When we know for a fact that this has also happened at the conference center, and that conference center business is, of course, city business. That is city revenue. We're seeing so much of that city revenue eroded in terms of building permit fees, development permit fees, facility uses, facility rentals, and on and on and on. So the city is indeed feeling the same pain as the business community of losing business that can't return revenue that can't be replaced. Right now, so many businesses like yours has taken on an online presence to sustain operations, even though most of those operations are limited due to layoffs and prohibition of gatherings. Whether they're doing this by holding virtual meetings, telecommuting, or offering pickup and delivery services, not just in restaurants, but in all kinds of retail businesses. And some are offering e-commerce solutions. For some, it's easy to say, gee, why don't you go online with your business and start up an e-commerce website? It costs money, which you have no income right now, and it takes time, which you've run out of already. So that isn't as easy a solution. We are trying to help people, lead them to joint e-commerce solutions and things like that. And those are some ways that people are demonstrating their inventiveness, their creativity, and their innovation, and it's showing up in unique and interesting ways all around our community here. Just about a week ago, I was invited to a friend's place, physical distancing of course, have a glass of wine on the patio. A concert on the cul-de-sac was called. And some tremendous local entertainers were performing on the cul-de-sac with families joining in small groups with their lawn chairs all around the cul-de-sac. And we're going to have a second event coming this Friday, I'm told. So I'm really excited that people are finding ways to still have some social contact. Of course, you're yelling hello across the cul-de-sac or, you know, applauding from a safe distance, but we're out, we're getting something done. And those are just some of the inventive ways that people are having life go on as usual. We saw the Rock for Relief. That was partially the responsibility and drive and motivation of the Nanaimo Foundation last Friday night. A good number of funds were raised during that event, and some local performers were also featured, including our own Lauren Spencer Smith, the new American Idol, when American Idol is back and operating, or certainly candidate for American Idol. Businesses, as much as possible, are taking advantage of the various supports and programs introduced by senior levels of government. All are appreciated, but none goes far enough to be considered a rescue for local small business. They will still leave people in precarious positions. But what we need to do, and what the Chamber wants to do, and what the recommendation of our business roundtable last week was, to engage the city, to engage those senior levels of government, to ramp up what they are doing. Announcements come out before programs are really defined. They're great to hear, but 3 days later you find out it's not really what you thought it was going to be, and it's not going to save your life or your business life. So we're finding out how precarious some of our business situations are, and we're finding that we need to lean to you, turn to you, to help us express to those senior levels of government the drastic times that we're struggling through right now. I want to applaud also the city's plans to stick to their plans for capital project continuance as a way to spend money to create positive financial impact on the community, maintain business in Nanaimo, and keep us ready for stimulus spending during the recovery phase when that comes. Of course, we know that the city capital project relies on many working members of the community to make it happen, from designers to lawyers to architects to engineers, and then the workers in the field who actually get the job done. So thank you very much for considering to do that. I know that there was calls in the community to stop everything, don't do anything, don't spend any money, don't build any more roads, don't replace the sewers, don't upgrade the water mains, don't spend a penny, which we know is very short-sighted and very foolish. So members of the roundtable especially supported your leadership, and some of them had commented that they had been in touch with mayor and council in the past and with staff, senior staff in the past, to encourage that work continues. I'm speaking especially of Vancouver Island Construction Association. I believe the Canadian Home Builders Association has been in touch already, or will be in touch with the same tone. Lastly, we're hoping that your continuing talks to address the upcoming city budget and the financial plan and the resulting tax rates will continue to be prudent. For those who are suffering so much, that prudence is very important. It's optically important, of course, perhaps even more so than factually important when the rubber hits the road. Significant challenges and difficult decision-making remain in front of all of us. The Nanaimo Chamber hopes that the economic and social support lifeblood of Nanaimo small businesses remains prominent in the city's considerations. Local purchasing by the city and social procurement initiatives should be enhanced to inject life into the local economy. We just started to have the conversations around the Coastal Community Social Procurement Initiative. And I'm hoping that Councillor Hemmons, who is working on this, can continue to push and fast-track work on that. That would be very productive in our opinions. Micro and small businesses, which are key to the downtown core and other areas of the city, in which 38% of businesses are licensed as home-based, require serious triage during their times. There needs to be an appetite by the city to join business leaders in developing a strategy and programs to assist entrepreneurs, owners, and operators in determining the next steps required to survive the coming 30 days to 9 months, whatever recovery looks like. We, in fact, are joining forces with a number of other business leaders in our community in the Mid-Island to form a recovery roundtable. We'll be able to expand on that in the coming days, but very, very much hopeful and would encourage the city to make sure that your economic development staff join us and any other representatives as we talk about how we form this economic recovery roundtable, to see that we are all proceeding together and have the same path in mind. Of course, we have the Economic Development Task Force, but its objectives and its terms of reference are well established. We're well underway as to what the role of that Economic Development Task Force is. So I suggest that this Economic Recovery Roundtable operates somewhat in parallel to that process of the Economic Development Strategic Planning. My last point is that once again, Council must work with senior levels of government to avail Nanaimo of all benefits to support business, relaxed taxation, sector-focused tax holidays, grants, subsidies, deferrals which are fine for cash flow but don't have great long-term benefit, no interest and forgivable loans, and something that helps businesses with their commercial leases and their rents, which their second month of doing no business, having no customers, no action until is coming up within the next 10 days. And so we will be in dire straits at that point in time. Of course, I can't leave without mentioning the work that the Health and Housing Task Force and the Homeless Coalition is doing to fast-track food security, shelter, and enhanced hygiene for our homeless. The health of our entire community is at risk, as we all know, and our healthcare services could be easily overwhelmed with the numbers of people that we're talking. I think we're being very lucky at this point in time. The Chamber with Roundtable input looks forward to continuing communications with you folks, and we feel we are, the Chamber is the appropriate community connector for continuing with collaborative discussions with our social network, direct membership platforms, provincial and national connections, and our senior government relationships. We bring a formidable communications force to the table, and we can exercise that through the Economic Recovery Roundtable. I'd be happy to take any questions with a long dissertation.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'm looking at the screen. Councillors? Councillor Martman?
Just 1 second, I'm going to unmute her. Just 1 second.
I actually have a question. I do want to really say thank you to the Chamber and all the participants of the roundtable and for sharing that with all of Council, and it was incredibly useful. So thank you very much to Kim.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Martin.
Anyone else? I want to say, Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to, Kim, I know this might be hard to answer, but when we look at, we've had one business firmly close in the next month when rent is due for the second time without customers, how large do you expect that to get?
I'm going to borrow somebody else's line and say I can't define that. The virus will define that. When we get the better handle on the virus, when we have a chance to count what's going on, I'm sure that there are businesses out there who don't even know that they're not going to be able to make it because they're so far from the story right now. People being given a brief bit of hope when we listen to Dr. Henry and our health minister and our Canadian health authority and the Prime Minister talk about seeing some light at the end of the tunnel and giving some hope to people that, gee, maybe I can hold out for 2, 4, 6 more weeks until we start to creep back into business. It really, you can't count it at this point in time. And there's many people in denial too, saying, I'm ready to come back, I'm ready to come back. But if you ask them June, the first week of June, when things might start to look good again, or look workable again, between now and June is a lot of lost days sales. And still the rent bill comes in and your utility bills come in, and even if you could defer them, that's the lost revenue that you have now, right now is likely not to be replaced. So I'm sorry, I don't have an answer, and I wish I could be more positive.
No, I appreciate that, Kim. Thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship, to you too, Mr. Smythe. I've heard in my discussions with different business people that some landlords are working with them with regard to rent, and I won't say forgiving, but at least allowing installment plans, that type of thing. Is there much of that happening to your knowledge? Or?
Councillor Turley, there is some of that happening, as you pointed out, and you've heard from some, we've heard from some, we've probably heard from an equal number who said that they're not receiving any kind of latitude from their landlord, which is unfortunate. If a landlord loses a tenant now, the likelihood of replacing that tenant in any short order is pretty darn slim. So, of course, you know, our standard line is work with your tenants to make sure they can continue to be tenants, and we'll get, just like we're all in this together, we'll all get out of this together. That's about what we could say now.
To paraphrase, a bird in the hand is better than one in the bush.
I say, if I were a landlord, that's the way I'd be perceiving it.
Councillor
Thank
Bond.
you.
Thank you, Worship. Question, if I may, Mr. Smythe. Can you, or have you been able to identify any particular sectors of our economy that are much more farther advanced in terms of not being able to recover? Is there certain sectors we should be concentrating on?
Certainly, anybody in tourism, travel, transportation, accommodations, hospitality are all businesses that are badly, badly damaged, and many won't come back after this. Many of our smaller tourism operators will be hard-pressed to have a season this year. I think you're going to see some property owners of motels who are going to be in bad shape after this is over, especially if we don't get any kind of summer tourist season, which is looking more and more likely at this point.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. Flipping that around a bit, Kim, what local businesses are thriving right now, and what are components that are allowing them to do that? Does that make sense?
Some of the support services, like accounting firms, legal firms, are doing okay, especially those in the accounting world. Some restaurants are finding a way to succeed and really modifying the size of their business and the operating model of their business. Some are finding it, restaurants are finding it easy to open for 2 or 3 nights a week with 3 or 4 menu items, with all orders taken in advance and paid for in advance. Other restaurants are operating on a open all week kind of thing for meals in the evening, and operating on a delivery model in those cases, or a pickup and takeout model. So some of those are doing all right. Certainly it would appear that automotive service is running all right. I've noticed just anecdotally, as well as garden centers right now who can operate with physical distancing. But people have more time now to get out to their garden and in their yards and work on projects. And so you're seeing some of those businesses do okay.
Thank you, Kim.
Anyone else? Let me just say, Mr. Smythe, thank you for your advocacy on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce and its membership. Your members' success, because it represents a broad spectrum of not only business but service providers in our community and nonprofits, the success of your membership is crucial to this community. And I would hope if any landlords are listening or people in that situation, if there was ever a time to exercise what used to be referred to as enlightened self-interest, it is now, because as Mr. Smythe has wisely pointed out, there will not be any new commercial tenants knocking on your door to take over your premises in the foreseeable future. And it's really important as council grapples with it for us to try and understand how best, within our limited toolbox, to use that overworked modern phrase, within our limited toolbox, what things we can do that will actually benefit the businesses who are hoping to keep their front door open and or be able to reopen their front door. There's not much benefit if we're going to give a break to, quote unquote, the owner of the premises only if the business itself, that is the tenant, can't survive. And this is going to be this is a problematic question, and what I'm looking for from council, what I'm expecting from the community, are innovative suggestions that will actually work and will be seen by the community to not only work but appear to be workable. And that is going to be challenging for us. I think Mr. Smythe has wisely pointed out that a number of schemes announced by the governments, and I give full credit to both the federal and provincial governments for the willingness to open up the government purses quite appropriately. This is when you do it. I give them full credit for that, but at the same time, those programs have to be effective. The trick is for us to get the money out of our collective wallets and into the tills of the people who need it, as I said on Friday when I had the morning session with Mr. Smythe and the chair of the regional district, our senior councillor, Councillor Thorpe. That is really crucial, and how we do that and the more innovative ways that people would suggest. This is not the time to advance every silly notion that comes into your head, but it is certainly the time to advance something that you've thought about that will assist all of us in trying to work out how we ensure that there is as least disruption to our economy and our community as is possible. And the innovative approaches that have been suggested, a lot of businesses who are doing business in a different way and manage to survive are to be complimented. They show us the way for all of us. But at the end of the day, I am optimistic. This is a good community. I expect everyone will try and cooperate to ensure that, and remind everyone, we are all in this together. We are all dependent on the mutual prosperity of our neighbors and their ability to work. So I just want to say thank you, Mr. Smythe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Council, for your time, and thank you to staff for allowing me to step into this room at this time. Thank you very much.
All right. And I want to remind Council and the people who are listening at home, the concept today is not to pass motions. The purpose of today is to provide significant information around the very important deliberations that we're all going to have to undertake over the next couple of weeks as we finalize the budget for this year and try and do those things that will most benefit our community in these difficult times. So the next item is the 2020-24 financial plan and property tax options. Ms. Lagan, our General Manager of Corporate Services, over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to introduce this item and then turn it over to Ms. Mercer and Ms. Fulla. Consistent with the April 9th presentation of the COVID-19 Financial Response, Relief and Recovery Framework work plan that we presented, we are bringing forward 3 information items specifically that were identified on the work plan, and a 4th given Friday's announcement by the provincial government with respect to the property tax due date penalty deferral for certain classes of property taxpayers. We wanted to provide additional information on that. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Fulla first, and she's going to walk through the 2024 financial plan from the provisional to today and many of the changes to set the level set information for discussion of all of the items today. We're starting with this one.
And before Ms. Fulla starts, I just want to use her as an example today of people stepping forward and continuing to work in difficult circumstances. Hers in particular suffering from a bike injury from the weekend. She is still here doing her bit for the city and our citizens. So before you start, thank you very much.
So good afternoon, Mayor and Council. This afternoon, I want to provide an update on the current final 2020-2024 financial plan based on the changes we've made since the adoption of the provisional plan. We're also going to talk about some possible options in light of the current provincial health emergency as a result of COVID-19. So this works. So first a little quick recap of how we got to where we are today. So as you recall, back in November, general managers presented to you their department's 2020 business plans. We also provided you with the draft project plan for 2020 to 2024. And then in December, we had our e-town hall, which gave the public a further opportunity to engage with council on the budget. And then in January, you adopted the 2020-2024 financial plan bylaw, which is referred to as either the provisional budget or the provisional financial plan. So since the budget was adopted, we have received updates to estimates as well as directives from council. So when we were looking at the provisional budget, we were looking at a 5.2% property tax increase. So that was 1% for the asset management reserve and a 4.2% general property tax increase. We are now currently sitting at 4.5%. So that's our 1% for the asset management reserve and a general increase of 3.5%. Now when I get to our budget driver slide, which is going to be a few slides from now, I'll talk a little bit about how we went from 5.2% to 4.5%. Now, looking back historically at our property taxes, you can see the 10-year average from 2010 to 2019 is 2.1%. And assuming council approved the budget as it is today, we'd be looking at a 10-year average from 2011 to 2020 of 2.4%. Now, when we look historically back, there is a few things I just want to remind you that you have to keep in mind. We did have a council policy to reduce industrial tax rates to the same level as commercial. The final year of that tax shift was in 2013. Also, in 2013, we implemented the 1% annual increase for our general asset management reserve, and that was extended in 2017 to 2022. And staff will come back prior to 2023 with recommendations on how we should proceed with increases for the general asset management reserve based on when we update our 20-year investment plan. And then the final item I'd like to point out is we did change how we account for the Vancouver Island Regional Library requisition. So prior to 2016, any increase was included in our property tax calculation. Starting in 2016, we now consider the Vancouver Island Regional Library requisition a collection for other governments. So that's not factored into that percentage. So what does a 4.5% property tax increase mean for the typical home in Nanaimo? They're looking at their municipal taxes going up approximately $95. Now, we also passed bylaws for increasing water, sewer, and sanitation user fees. So for the typical household using 220 gallons a day, they're going to see an increase of about $42 in their water user fees, $6 for their sewer fees, and $1 for sanitation. So you're looking at a total impact to the typical house of about $144 for their municipal taxes as well as their user fees. And just for some context, when we looked at the provisional budget, the impact for the typical home for property taxes was sitting at $109. So now just to go over the bigger picture of the budget. The current budget has revenue projections of $198 million. So this is going to provide funding for all our day-to-day operations, for projects, for contributions to infrastructure, renewal reserves, as well as Vancouver Island Regional Library. About 59% of that comes from property taxation. Now, we also have other funding sources that are not considered revenue. For example, borrowing. We're doing borrowing this year to help fund the Fire Station Number 1 continuing project. We're also doing borrowing for the new automated sanitation garbage truck that we ordered last year and should be arriving, I believe it is in June. Another source of funding for us is reserves. Now, reserves typically fund projects. In 2020, for example, about 82% of our project budget is coming from reserve funding. But we also sometimes use reserves to fund operations. An example of that would be in both 2020 and 2021, we're using money from the RCMP reserve to help reduce the impact of that contract increase.
And just for the benefit of people listening, Ms. Fuller, the $198 million in revenue projection, is that based? Pre-provincial health emergency. So as you know from Ms. Lagan's presentation on the night, we are projecting a shortfall. We don't anticipate that we'll make that whole $198 million. Thank you.
And then the one other item I just want to point out, because other revenues, people go, what is other revenues? And we did talk about this back in December, but just to remind everyone what other revenues is, we're talking about things like property rentals, recoveries, 911 levy, Fortis gas money we receive, the hotel tax, of course, the Airbnb portion goes to our Housing Legacy Reserve. The other portion is a payover to the NHA. It also includes things like tax penalties and the adjustment on the MFA debt. Looking at the operation side of the expenditure budget, we're looking at a budget of about $153 million, and this is for day-to-day city services. So this is when you pick up the phone and dial 911, someone actually answers the phone. This is you turn on your tap and you get clean, healthy drinking water. This is getting your streets plowed. This is having parks and trails that are maintained right now so you can get out there in that beautiful sunshine and enjoy everything the city has to offer. This is not looking at project budgets, and this doesn't include the requisition for the Vancouver Island Regional Library. This is really just your day-to-day services in the city. Now, we went line by line to the 2020 key budget drivers when we presented this in November and December, so I will not bore you with going through that line by line again, but really where I want to focus this time is the numbers that have changed that helped us bring the tax rate down. So the first item I want to talk about is the RCMP contract. We were scheduled to have 3 new members here April 1st. Obviously they're not here yet. We did receive notification that there was going to be a delay. So we have adjusted the budget, assuming a 3-month delay in their start date. So that gave us a savings of $128,000. And of course, just a reminder, we do budget the RCMP contract at 95%, so we do assume some vacancies in the contract. The other item that changed is wages and benefits. So when we presented the provisional budget, we did say that we didn't have all the numbers in time for extended health. We have incorporated those numbers now, and we looked at about an $84,000 increase for benefits as a result of those new rates. The other change incorporated here is Council did approve moving the funding for the AVICC from 2020 to 2021. So we have a $15,000 decrease to the project expenditure increase. And then one other item I wanted to point out on this slide for anyone that's looking back at our previous presentations is the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve has disappeared from here, and that's because we only show 6-figure changes. When Council decided for the provisional budget to cap the casino revenue at 67%, that means it was no longer a 6-figure change, so it's going to show up on my next slide under Other, which captures everything else that's below 6 figures. Now we also have some changes on the revenue side. We received confirmation of our provincial traffic fine revenue. It's up $163,000, so the budget sits at $1.33 million for 2020. We got confirmation of our final number for the RDN Recreation Services Agreement, so we were able to increase the budget $104,000. So it's also sitting at $1.34 million, almost the same as our traffic fine. And we got our final number for growth. So we always take a conservative approach to growth. We were using $1.2 million. It came in at $1.47 million. And just for some comparison there, in 2019 our growth was 1.56. So it is down a bit, but it's pretty comparable to 2018. And then, of course, the other line that has changed here is other changes, so that's where we capture all those ones under 6 figures. So some of those changes were, of course, the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve. We had some decreases to our fleet rates between provisional and final. Our MIA insurance invoice came in a little under budget. We had an adjustment to the interest on our NAC debt, which, of course, is a good news story there because NAC debt pays out this year, so we'll finally have paid off the pool. So now for Council, we have prepared some options for your consideration when it comes to approving the final budget. Council could also provide further direction today to us on other options you'd like to see included in our May 4th decision report. So when we're looking at these options, I do think there's a few things that we need to all keep in mind. The extent of the economic impact of COVID-19 is unknown at this time. You need to keep in mind that the revenue and expenditure projections are all based on pre-provincial health emergency, pre-COVID. So when we look at the 2021-2024 projected property taxes increases, they could go up or they could go down as we develop the 2021 budget and the 2021-2025 financial plan. As we've discussed before, we use a modified zero-based budgeting approach. So that means when we sit down to do the 2021 budget, we're going to build the budget line by line. We're going to look at everything. That means we're going to have to go back and look at revenue projections and growth projections. And depending on how fast the economy recovers from this, we may have to decrease revenue projections. We may have to decrease growth projections. So that means the projected tax increases you see in 2021 could be higher unless we can find expenditure cuts. And that may mean we have to make some tough decisions and look at service level changes if we want to reduce expenditures and keep tax levels lower. The other thing I'd like Council to keep in mind is that your March 18th special Council meeting, you did approve staff's recommendation to allocate $2.96 million of the 2019 general surplus to your special initiatives reserve. Now we put that money in that reserve and it wasn't earmarked for any one thing. So that means we do have that funding available. We could use it potentially to decrease property taxes. We could use it to help fund this year's shortfall, or a combination of using it for both. The other thing to keep in mind is we do have our General Financial Stability Reserve. Now the one thing with the General Financial Stability Reserve is any money we use from that we do need to repay, so we need to keep that in mind, that that money has to be repaid in a reasonable time frame, which then has property tax implications in the future. So we just need to be cautious. It's there for a reason. It was developed for things like this, but we also want to be prudent in how we spend that money because there is future impacts. And then the final point I wanted to bring up before I bring up the options is, as you know, when we use one-time funding, so if we use funding from reserves to reduce property taxes, that means we're going to see an increase to property taxes in year 2. Because now our base went from, they can see me, right? Our base went from here down to here, so now our differential is going to be more. This is where you need a whiteboard. So our differential is now going to be more, so we have to make that up. So just all those keep in mind as we look through our options, or as Council provides other options they'd like us to explore. So of course, the first option is we could approve the 2020-2024 financial plan as it's being presented today. As I said, that would give us a 4.5% property tax increase. 1% of that is for the asset management reserve. 3.5% is a general property tax increase, and that have an impact to the typical house of $95. So looking at the advantages of this option, when we're in such uncertain economic times, this puts Council with the lowest projected starting point for 2021 taxes. So that gives you the most flexibility. If we're looking then that if the economy is having a tough time, we're in a recession, we're starting at the lowest point for 2021. So it makes it easier to make some adjustments. This also preserves the $2.96 million in the special initiatives reserve that we set aside. So that means if we do have revenue shortfalls this year, we can tap into that money and use it to cover our shortfalls with no impact on future taxes, because that special initiatives money, we don't have to pay that back like we do the General Financial Stability Reserve. Of course, the disadvantage to this option is it doesn't provide any additional financial relief to residents or businesses. Option number 2 would be to smooth the property tax increase between 2020 and 2021. So one way we could do this is we could take $830,000 from the Special Initiatives Reserve. That would reduce our 2020 property taxes to 3.8, but of course, as that's one-time funding, it does push up our 2021 starting point to 3.8. The advantage of this option is it does provide some additional financial relief to residents. And it also would leave about $2.1 million in our Special Initiatives Reserve, so we could tap into that money again to address the potential shortfall that we're going to see for 2020. That would be our first source of funding, and then if we need to further, we could look at our General Financial Stability Reserve, but it gives us some money that we could address 2020 shortfalls with. The disadvantage is this would push our 2021 starting tax point higher than it does in option 1. And we also have to consider we don't know how quickly the economy is going to recover, and that could put upward pressure on our 2021 property taxes. If we have declining revenues, because it takes time for things to come back, or we have slower growth, unless we cut service levels, it's going to be difficult to maintain a lower property tax rate. So Council may be faced with some tough decisions on what they want to do with service levels. And our final option would be to have no general property tax increase and just do our 1% for the asset management reserve. So how we could do this option is take 2.96 from the Special Initiatives Reserve, as well as $825,000 from our General Financial Stability Reserve. So when we've looked at this, we've factored in, we'd have to repay that $825,000. We factored that in over 2021 to 2024. So that gives us a 1% property tax increase in 2020, and our starting point would be 6.8 in 2021. So and this would have an impact to the typical house of $21. So some of the advantages of this option is really that it provides some financial relief to residents, but this one has a few more disadvantages. We are starting at a very high projected property tax increase in 2021. So if we're starting at 6.8, it's going to be very challenging for staff and council to bring that rate down, especially if we're still in a recession. The other thing is this would use all of the 2.96 that we have in the Special Initiatives Reserve. So if we do have a funding shortfall in 2020, we'd be looking at funding that from our General Financial Stability Reserve, which would further increase property taxes as we would need a repayment for that. And then of course, the other point that I've made with option 2 is we just don't know how quickly the economy is going to recover, and we don't know what kind of pressure that's going to be putting on us when we look at our 2020-2021 budget. And now I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Mercer, who's going to talk a little bit about shifting property taxes between classes.
Thank you, Ms. Fuller. Ms. Mercer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick note that this part of the presentation was prepared before Thursday afternoon's announcement with regards to relief that the province of BC is giving. So just a little disclaimer on that. So the city has the ability to shift tax revenues collected between classes. And in the past, the city has done this. In the past, we've shifted taxes from major and light industry classes to residential properties. And this was done to bring tax rates for those two classes, major and light industry, to be equal to our business class tax rates. And this was to lessen our dependence on big business such as Harmac, as that was the time when that industry was having a downturn. So currently, we collect 68% of our taxes from residential properties, 29% from Class 6 businesses, and the remaining 3% is collected from all the other classes, so utility, major and light industries, managed forest land, and recreation, nonprofit, and farm properties. So those property classes count for very little of our taxes collected. Over the last 10 years, when compared to similar population size and neighboring communities, the city of Nanaimo sits in the middle of the pack with regards to the tax multiplier as well as the percentage of total tax revenue for business class properties. So Nanaimo has ranged from 2.49 to 3.03 for tax multiplier for that period, and and the average was 2.8 to 3.6 for that time. Nanaimo has remained consistent in collecting 29% of total taxes from our business other class, and the average was 26% for that same time period. So what we found when comparing with all the other municipalities is that they've been consistent over the 10 years with their percentages as well. And so what this means is the city of Nanaimo hasn't been the highest taxer of business properties, but nor have we been the lowest. And that the graph on the PowerPoint presentation just shows a graphical representation of that. So on March 16th, the province of BC announced new COVID-19 supports for businesses and local governments. And in that announcement, the school tax rate was reduced, so all business classes for classes 4 to 8 would receive, on average, a 25% reduction in overall taxes owing. They also announced changes to the tax penalty due date, which we'll be discussing in the next report. And they had no reduction in tax rates provided for residential or the remaining classes. So at this point, they've only announced the one reduction overall for businesses. So in the example that we provided to give council an option is we don't have 2020 tax rates yet, so we use 2019 to model. And what we did was we kept business class property at the same level of taxation as in 2018. So that meant we shifted about $1.5 million from business to residential, and that impact increased the average residential house by approximately another $45. So there is an impact to shifting any taxes from businesses. And I will turn it over. Oh, we have one more slide. So our next steps, on May 4th, we will bring back a decision report for council to make a final determination as to how we're going to proceed with the 2020-2024 financial plan. And then on May 11th, we will bring forward both the financial plan amendment bylaw and the property tax bylaw to council for all 4 readings. And we're allowed to do that under our current order. And as you all know, we have to have this all done by before May 15th. So that's where we're at right now.
Thank you. If I may ask a question, I appreciate you may not be able to answer it, but to put it in terms that I can understand and other folks listening. So what's the actual impact of the provincial announcement around the 25% reduction? So in other words, if my total tax bill is $1 for commercial enterprise, now commercial premises, what will that mean? Will it mean 5 cents, 10 cents, 15 cents? What's the actual?
So we're in the process of calculating that right now. So
I think that's important because obviously council, it's no secret, is being asked to consider relief from every sector of the economy, the not-for-profits, our tenants, etc. And I guess it's talking about tax rates, etc. It's nice to be able to put it in an actual understandable dollar amount. When you talk about percentages, what's the percentage of what? What does it actually likely mean? So that would be very helpful information. Ms. Ligon.
Sure, Your Worship, if I could add to that, the information received over the weekend with respect to details of the announcement from April 16th is that all businesses, all classes outside of residential property taxpayers will benefit to at least 25% lower. And actual dollar amounts would be depending on their starting point with their property tax assessment. And it is different depending on the class. We are working through those numbers, but if it was $1, then it would be 75 cents or less going forward, is our understanding.
But in terms of the overall tax bill is what I'm getting at. So if you're between your city tax, your school tax, etc., if you're paying $1, what does the 25% reduction in the school tax mean?
It's in some cases, some of the classes will receive a 50% reduction in the school tax portion, equaling at least a 25% reduction in their overall bill. That is our understanding.
So in other words, if you're paying $1, you're likely to end up paying 75 cents this year.
Yes.
Without any relief from the city.
Yes, because it is a
That's the kind
payover.
of understanding that I need to have to consider. Thank you. I appreciate you've had to work very quickly with limited information and being received at times not convenient to the council schedule. Go ahead, I can see you all again now. Questions? Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. A question, if I may, to Ms. Fola. It's regarding repayment in reasonable time on some of our reserves. I understand that they have minimums that we've set, council has set. When we say repayment in reasonable time, do we set that reasonable time, or is that set by the province?
Through Your Worship, to Councillor Bonner, the city would set what a reasonable time frame is.
So in theory, we could just say the reasonable time frame is 3 years from now if we wanted to.
Correct. For the option that I presented, option number 3, with us using the $825,000, we chose a 4-year repayment term.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Martman. And then Councillor Brown.
I'm just throwing this out there because this is a very unusual year. What does it look like if we deferred that 1% general asset management reserve, where we're not expecting to collect those in 2023 or 2024? What if we didn't do the 1% this year? I know it's not a popular topic.
Ms. Fuller.
Through your worship to Councillor Martman, we would have funding challenges with our 10-year project plan. Our 10-year project plan is based on us receiving that money to fund our infrastructure renewal, so we would be looking at deferring projects if we have reduced that funding.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to staff, I'm curious if, what is the impact on the expected impact, or maybe this hasn't been calculated yet, of the casino money not coming into the strategic infrastructure reserve, because they're closed right now. I'm just curious, you know, if they were to remain closed for the rest of the year, or if they were to remain closed for a 6-month period, what would be the quality?
Through your worship to Councillor Brown, so I have looked at that. In the worst case scenario, and we received absolutely no casino money this year, which of course we will receive some funding for Q1 because they were open in January and February. But assuming worst case scenario, you still have sufficient money in your strategic infrastructure reserve to fund everything in the 5-year plan. We don't have tons of wiggle room, but we can fund everything that was planned. The flip side of that is only 67% does go into your strategic infrastructure reserve. The remainder does go to fund general operations, and we have taken that into account in Ms. Legan's presentation on April 9th. So we would have a shortfall in funding for the city for the other portion.
Thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Make sure I'm on here. I am. So the question I have is probably not a big topic, but with regard to the water fees, the average home for 2020 being $594, does the amount of consumption, I assume, would change that? If not a little bit, at least a fair amount. I'm thinking in terms of people now wanting to produce, food-producing gardens, which of course is going to involve water consumption if we have a dry year. And I'm wondering if that figure takes into account the potential of that being more, or is that kind of normal year's consumption the information is based on?
Through your worship to Councillor Turley, that's based on 220 gallons per day, so that's average usage. So that doesn't take into account if usage increased, it's an average.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Thorpe, and then Councillor Bonner, and then Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and through you, Ms. I realize we're not debating the options today, but I really appreciate the clarity of the report and the information that you've laid out for us. A question, and it probably doesn't amount to a lot of money in the large picture, but I'm curious to know if the city's in a position to recoup grant money that we might have distributed for events that now will not be taking place this summer.
Ms. Legan.
Through your worship, to Councillor Thorpe, we will be bringing forward on April 27th our information item dealing specifically with the framework that was provided on April 9th to recover from COVID scenario with as much economic strength as possible, with the intent to disperse and distribute as much of the grant funding as possible to the organizations that could pay down their fixed costs, even if they've had to cancel events, and to pay some of their sunk costs as well, so that at the end of the year and going into 2021, when they resurrect the event or the activity, they're in a strengthened position. So at this point, we're bringing forward a information item to support paying the maximum amount of grant distribution as possible, and possibly looking at a small pool for those that will need it to stay afloat over the next 8 to 9 months.
Thank you for the information, and personally that's an approach that I would support. I think we need to put ourselves in a position where we are funding as much as possible, putting that money back into the economy. Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Question is, I have two small questions. Actually, one's a big one. The first small one is, can we take the asset management 1% and bump it forward a year so that it actually ends a year later and not included in this year's budget? And if we did, how much would that affect the future project?
Through your worship to Councillor Bonner. So are you, just to clarify your question, are you saying that you would like to do 0% for the asset management reserve this year, but then do 2% next year?
No, bump it out.
No, it would be 1%.
Oh.
It would be 0 this year and another 1% at the end of when we were scheduled to turn it off.
Okay, we'd have to go back and do some calculations. Off the top of my head, I think we'd have some funding challenges in future years. We'd be, I believe, okay in 2020, but I'd have to confirm that. But I believe we would have issues possibly in 2021. But I'm just recalling off the top of my head, I'd actually have to go do the calculation.
Okay, and if I may, the other one, I sent an email to Mr. Rudolph regarding this concept here. I'm not even sure if we're legally allowed to do it. I'm sort of in favor of keeping the taxes as they are because I know it'll lower the tax increase that's going to happen in a couple of years from now. If we lower our taxes this year, we're going to have higher tax increases later. But I'm wondering, is it possible for us, when we send out the tax notice, to utilize some of our reserves from last year, or sorry, some of our surpluses from last year, to give each of our taxpayers a check for the amount of money that their taxes went up? So in essence, say we leave it at 4.5%, and to homeowners' taxes go up $95. They also get a check for $95. So in essence, everybody will have paid exactly the same taxes they paid last year.
So just so I'm clear, Councillor Bonner, they're going to pay all their taxes and then we're going to cut them a check for the amount of the increase.
That's correct, yeah.
I hate to say it, it sounds a bit Trumpian to me. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. I'm just wondering if those that aren't speaking could put your microphones on mute. We're getting a little bit of feedback, so I think it's from one of you that's not on mute. So when you're not talking, if you could mute your microphone. And as to that question, yeah, no, I'll leave it.
Your Worship,
Mr. Rudolph.
Having been the recipient of the email, I understand the intent is to not compromise our going into 2021 and start with a baseline that's acceptable and find a method that would reduce the burden of the increase this year. I think that was a one-time, I believe this is the suggestion that was trying to find a way to alleviate this year's pain but not compromise next year's tax gain sort of thing. And I believe that was the intent of, the spirit of Councillor Bonner's ask.
So we're talking about a year between paying and receiving, is that?
I think he was indicating, well, he can speak for himself, but he asked, the conversation was, is it possible to not compromise our starting point for next year and yet give some forgiveness to those taxpayers this year? I think that was the intent.
Councillor Bonner, do you want to explain a little further, please?
Certainly, Your Worship. If I may, even if we were to institute a 0% tax increase, some of our taxpayers will still have a tax increase, and some of our taxpayers, their taxes will go down. The idea behind this is that every single person who pays taxes in the city will receive a check for the amount of taxes their taxes go up this year, like when they get their bill in July. And we will pay for that out of our surplus from last year and or some reserve. The idea here is that no one will actually pay extra money, because we also know that when we institute, say, 5% tax increase, those people whose houses increase more than the average sometimes get a 17% tax increase. And so it'll be fair across the board in that everyone will receive a check. The checks will vary, but no one will pay more than what they paid last year. One-time year only.
I think I understand your proposition. My concern is, though, that somebody who's lost value in their home is not going to be treated as fair as the way somebody who's seen increased value. It's an interesting proposition, and we're not voting today. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. That would be something I believe would require a legal opinion to see if it's even allowable under the charter. Nothing I've ever heard of before, so very innovative, but definitely we would need to have that looked into.
Ms. Leggett.
So thank you, Your Worship. I concur with Sheila that a legal opinion also needs consideration around CRA, because it'd be tax dollars, after-tax dollars paid for, and then return tax dollars, and I think there would be some complication there that we'd have to understand in advance. So probably a tax lawyer would need to look at this for us.
All right, thank you. If Councillor Bonner, if you're finished, I'll move to Councillor Armstrong, and then on to Councillor Gesselbrock.
For Ms. Fulla, I'm just wondering about the gas tax. So obviously, it's going to be down significantly. Do we put a lot of faith in that?
Why am I viewing Jim Turley's access? I think Councillor Turley just...
You're sharing your...
Gas tax.
Just, if you can just...
I have no idea what happened.
We had a bit of a technical difficulty here. Sorry, Ms. Fulla.
Through your worship to Councillor Armstrong. So currently the gas tax we receive, it goes to our Community Works Reserve Fund. So if the funding came in lower than we are anticipating, then we would likely have to look at shifting some projects around in the next project planning cycle.
Thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. Just a question regarding shifting the tax burden and the 0-point budget. Reducing the tax for commercial properties is quite a blunt tool in terms of being able to specify businesses that were affected by COVID. And I'm curious, are there any tools that can provide more specific relief for these businesses of what the city can do? And maybe it's outside of taxes, or there's something that we can do in terms of adjusting rates and using some ideas from the 0-point tax as well. I'm just curious, because it just seems like these tools are extremely broad, and they're not going to really provide the relief to the specific sectors of business that do require them. And I'm just curious if there's any other options. Thank you.
Ms. Mercer.
Through your worship to Councillor Gesselbrock, from a tax perspective, it is very broad and difficult to break it down into types of business as one from a fairness and equitable perspective. So from that perspective, it is blanket across all businesses of a specific class. As far as other relief methods for business, we collect business licenses. We could look at perhaps something there. That's the only one off the top of my head that I can think of.
Councillor Gesselbrock, I appreciate very much what you're driving at. I know what you're trying to say. So if the car dealership's doing well, but the restaurant next door isn't, we're going to try and give relief to the restaurant, but not to the car dealership. And that's where it gets extremely problematic. And I could just throw a word in here for progressive taxation. This is why all the support of an extremely efficient progressive taxation system, because at the end of the day, you take from those who are making it and you don't from those who aren't. And when we get into the complexities of property taxation, it's why it's such a blunt instrument, to use your language, to try and support city services. Anything arising out of that, or can I go to Councillor Turley? Councillor Turley?
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Turley.
Yeah, I just had to unmute myself. So the question I have is with regard to attachment B, we're listing the business and other class multipliers, comparable population. So other class multipliers, I assume, refer to light and heavy industrial?
Through your worship to Councillor Turley. No, that's just how the province classifies, or BC Assessment classifies it, is business other, that's class 6. Major and light industry are classes 4 and 5. So this is just what BC Assessment considers business, apart from utilities, major, light, non-profit.
Okay, so then I don't know if all of the municipalities listed here amalgamated their tax rates under one from light and heavy industrial like the Navajo did. Because if they didn't, then obviously their rate would show lower than because they have higher rates for if they got 2 pulp mills there, for example, in Prince George.
Right, so in the graph, in the information that's in the PowerPoint presentation, that is class 6 only. And we are able to break it down by other classes. The information comes from the BC Government Stats website, where we all provide our tax information on a yearly basis, and they accumulate it all and put it into a graph for us. So that is just class 6. We have not touched class 4.
Oh, just class 6, right?
Yes.
Yeah, except our class 6. Oh, so you're able to factor out classes 4 and 5 even though it's the same rate. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah. We only selected class 6.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Worship. Just 2 questions. The first one is obviously council and through our budgeting process, we added different service level increases. Are any of those can be visited? You know, just some minor positions in there. And I'm just wondering if have some of them not been higher that you know, we are able to be revisited?
Your Worship, yes. Just generally speaking, so there's new positions and then there's vacant positions because people have left the organization or retired or whatever. Some of those positions are essential and we're pursuing those. So there are a couple of vacancies there. We have done recruitment on some of them. I'll use an example, the electrical technician to support the 50 some odd traffic signals in the city that we do not actually have a staff person on board to manage that. It's a completely contracted out function. So that felt like an essential move to get us to a place of resiliency and not relying on one contractor in town. So if there was an interest in getting that a little more ascertained, I can report back to you. But we basically put a hold on hiring, and they're all considered on a case-by-case basis. So we've not really intentionally upped our game. We've only tried to get back to a place where we felt we needed to be to maintain the organization in a sustainable manner. So it's a bit of as everything else, it's a bit of a hard question to answer fully without going through the list of types of positions and their status. But we only had a very small number of new positions that were added, including the 3 police positions. But we can revisit that if you wish and give you a status report.
Councillor Brown?
My second question. Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. My second question, just building on the questions around the asset management reserve. First of all, under no circumstance do I think that where it says there will be 0% asset management increase needed, will that actually be the case? I imagine some refinement with always asset shortfalls and liabilities for we get a better understanding of the life cycle. But what I am wondering is, obviously that's 1%, and as well as I heard you, and I hear you very clearly about it could create funding shortfalls. But if we were in a position to not do that 1% this year, but borrow from reserves to make up for it, and then have a phase, whether it's 0.25 or whatever that works out to with the compounding over the next 4 years to make up for the shortfall. Is that an option? So essentially, the question is, if we didn't tax for that 1% this year, but in the subsequent 4 years had a phased-in repayment of that 1% that we'd be missing from this year, but in order to pay for those projects, also borrow from our other reserves, like I believe we've been given the power to do so.
Through your worship, Councillor Brown, it's an option. We have borrowed from reserves and paid them back historically. It is an option. There's limited places where we could do that, and that wouldn't have an impact on future projects. So we would have to look at that in further detail.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing we're going to be able to do will come without some pain. Anyone else that I've missed? Any further questions, comments, Mr. Rudolph?
Your Worship, I think you mentioned it earlier. I think it's worthy of noting the absolute number that it materially impacts the average household as opposed to a percentage number. And I think the number embedded in this general taxation for the average residential folio was $95. If you divide that by 12, it works out to $7.90 a month, or 26 cents a day. So it depends on the way you unpack that. But of course, as always is the case, it always boils down to a tax percent increase. It materially impacts the organization because it has such a powerful impact when you add up all the folios. And so it's just, I just wanted to mention that because I think Ms. Lagan mentioned it, Ms. Fuller mentioned it, you mentioned it. It's worthy of remembering that, unfortunately though, the newspapers and all of us go to the tax increase percent. It's really how much is it, and it's just a point to remember in this deliberations as it turns out. But it will end up being a percent, as we even showcased in our submissions for you. So that's just reality.
I'm not sure if Councillor Armstrong and Councillor Gesselbrock.
Councillor Armstrong and Gesselbrock, you've got your little hands up electronically still. Are you? Thank you very much, and Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Further to what Mr. Rudolph just mentioned, is it possible to get an idea on how much individuals are going to be impacted by our tax increase? The reason I'm asking is that we received a number of emails last year about this time, or in a couple of months from now, from some people who, many of the lower end houses that weren't worth the average, were worth in the $350,000, $400,000 mark, went up considerably more than the average, and so those people ended up paying a larger percentage on their taxes, and it was a lot more than just the 5% that we increased it. And those folks at the higher end in the million plus market, where that market wasn't increasing that much, those people actually received much less of a tax increase percentage-wise. So is there a way to figure out, probably through a spreadsheet of some sort, how that is going to affect the various ranges of tax of houses and commercial places that we have in town?
Ms. Lagan?
Through your worship, to Councillor Bonner, yes, we absolutely can do that spreadsheet for you. The average assessment on the average home in Nanaimo for 2020 is $527,000. We'd be able to do that in increments of, say, $50,000 and let you know from $250,000 to $1.25 what it would be. On the commercial side, it's a bit more complex, but it is possible to do a proxy, show you a spreadsheet that would give you some idea if your house was assessed at $300,000, what it would be. I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, and if I may, does that include the increases that those houses have, their asset value has increased over the last year? Because that's how the taxes are based. So if I may have a house, and I don't have a house that's worth $550,000, if I have a house that's worth $400,000 and it goes up 10%, but the average house increase is only 5%, I'm going to be paying much more than 4.5% tax increase. Do we have any way of figuring that part out? Because if that's the case and the lower end houses are increasing much more than the higher end houses, our tax increase is going to be borne by those people who can only afford lower end houses.
Ms. Mercer.
Through your worship, to Councillor Bonner, we can most likely run, it will be a very, very large spreadsheet comparing last year's assessment to this year's assessment, and see what we can pull from that. And it's really, because it's really on a property by property basis, and all we can do for our presentations is give an average. Because every single property has a different impact based on if they've had improvements to it, or there's so many factors in there that affect a property's value. That unless we went and looked at every single property, that's a really hard question to answer.
Ms. Legan.
If I may, thank you, Worship, just add to what Ms. Mercer said. It is based on the real estate, largely the assessment value, neighborhood improvements, age of home, etc. And so it would be a one-to-one spreadsheet, which would mean it would be massive. Anything is doable. The value, and why I use the word proxy when I first answered, is that we can give you a proxy, so we can do a sampling that will be directionally correct but not specific to everyone. So we would categorize and say, in this neighborhood, 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, 400,000, that type of information for you, and make it an actually functioning spreadsheet that you'd be able to drive some information from. So yes, but it would be more proxy-like, but directionally correct.
Thank you, and I don't spend too much time on this, but I think it just gives us a much more clearer idea. And I don't think I'm going to ask for this next year. It's just that because of the way we are right now, the people who are being affected by this, I think the people who have smaller incomes and lower houses may be getting the brunt of this pandemic. Thank you.
I think, Councillor Bonner, your heart is in the right place, and I'm not saying in contrast your head isn't on this, because I appreciate exactly what you're trying to say, and you're quite right. You know, the house in West Vancouver that was worth $3 million last year is probably $2.5 million this year, and somebody arguably has lost $500,000 of equity that they don't have anymore. And the poor soul in Nanaimo who's seen their house go up by $50,000 is going to pay a higher rate of taxation, a higher taxation than the person whose $600,000 house is now worth $5, or an $800,000 house worth $6. But at the same time, if we're trying to achieve some fairness because of the pandemic situation, over the long haul it also has implications. And that's where it gets difficult. Sometimes you get lucky in the market, and sometimes you don't. The people who bought the house a long time ago maybe are building a great deal more equity than they deserve, and it's non-taxable because it's their personal residence. And on the other hand, a number of smaller houses, or less valuable houses, if I can use that phrase, in this community are owned by other people who it's their second house, it's their rental property, etc., and the taxation we charge them. I think you'd probably agree with me, it's a good thing that they pay a reasonable rate of taxation because it's their second house. If it's your only house, it's a different proposition. And this is the frustration of to use the term that Councillor Gesselbrock used earlier, this is the blunt instrument approach, and it's hard. It's very hard, and if we're trying to compensate for the pandemic, you just have to step back, I think, and I'm going to go back to what Mr. Rudolph said and Ms. Lagan and others today. The average increase is not substantive in terms of real dollars, but yes, it's going to potentially hurt people on the lower end who've seen those houses go up, because those houses are in the value range that people can afford. Whereas if you had literally a $900,000 house last year, maybe this year it's only worth $750,000. But this is what we're stuck with, and I much appreciate the information that staff's been able to bring forward today. Councillor Martman.
Unmute, she's muted.
You've got to unmute yourself. Councillor Martman,
there we go.
You start over again, please, because you were muted.
Yeah, I realize that. I was just very quickly, I was going to say, as one of those persons that owns a very small home that has been one of those ones that increased, for me, and I don't know how many other people this might apply to though, when I get my property or my DC tax assessment and I see how much it's gone up, and mine did go up $40,000-$50,000 this year, I'm quite happy to pay my property tax because I'm quite happy to know I've got equity. So I think it's half a dozen of one and a dozen of the other.
Thank you very much. Anything further on this? All right, if not, I want to thank Ms. Lagan, Ms. Fuller, and Ms. Mercer for the presentation today. We have lots to think about. If I can go back to the agenda, we are on to item C now, which is the property tax due date. Again, Ms. Lagan gets to introduce.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm introducing this item. It was included in the addendum. We prepared it after the announcement on Thursday by the provincial government with respect to the property tax classes, which have been given a mandated deferral with respect to the property tax due date penalty. I want to emphasize that there was no recommendation to change the property tax due date itself. We have put together information with respect to aligning that property tax due date penalty change from July 3rd to the October 1st timeframe for consideration of council with respect to residential property tax payers. And I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Mercer to walk through it. I do want to mention that if in fact council's in favor, we would include it in the as part of the property tax bylaw coming forward on May 11th.
Ms. Mercer. Thanks, Ms. Lagan.
Thank you, Your Worship. So as you all know, we must pass a property tax bylaw by May 15th of this year based on the community charter. And we are also required under the municipal tax regulation to charge a 10% penalty on any balance outstanding after the due date. Now, the community charter does give us provision under section 235, and it permits municipalities to establish an alternative municipal tax scheme where we can change the due date as well as the timing of the penalties issued. So currently, the city does use an alternative tax scheme where we keep the standard due date of the first day after July 1st, but we choose to split up the penalty into two 5% penalty dates. So the first 5% is due the day after the tax due date, and the other 5% is approximately due on anything outstanding 6 weeks later. So on April 16th, the province of BC announced relief for businesses and local government. And in this announcement, they reduced the school tax rates for business classes and delayed any penalty on these taxes to October 1st. So the province also announced that school tax payovers for municipalities would be due at the end of the year to help municipal cash flows. So what council, based on this information, what council could consider is keeping the tax due date at July 2nd this year and make that a soft due date. And this will help with the city's cash flows, as some people will be able to pay at that July 2nd due date. And that will help with our cash flow. What we would recommend is, or what we suggest, is to move the penalty date for all property classes to October 1st, and not just those business classes outlined in the government news release. And this would provide an equitable alignment for all classes if they have the same due date. What council will need to consider is, do you want to split up that 10% into 5%, 5% due dates, say one due on October 1st and one approximately 6 weeks later, or at a different date? Or do you want to do the full 10% after October 1st? And so the financial impact of that scenario is cash flows would likely be fine, as there would probably be no short-term borrowing needed as the school tax has been delayed till the end of the year, the payover for that. And that gives us about $18 to $20 million of cash outflow that we can push out to the end of the year. The possible downside is we might not receive as much penalty revenue, which we do have about $508,000 budgeted in our current year financial plan. But that's, on average, we receive about that much, so it could be more, it could be less. Every year it comes in at a different amount. And there would be no impacts to the other government payovers, as we are required to pay those all by the end of July or August 1st. So we should be in fairly good cash flow shape, and all properties owners would have a bit of a delay on the tax penalty. So I'll turn it back to council to discuss your thoughts on that.
Councillor Armstrong, did you raise your hand? No? Then it's Councillor Brown, please.
Thank you, Worship. I'll just state my preference is to push the penalty off as long as possible. If people are truly having a hard time, I don't want to be responsible for collecting when they're having difficult paying. With that said, I hope that folks that can pay their bills on time will continue to do so, and realize that we're all in this together, so we should help make relief for those that are in genuine need.
Before I go to Councillor Martman and Councillor Armstrong, Ms. Gurry?
Perhaps council could make that recommendation to include that option in the report for clear directions. So staff will come back with that option, and you can then discuss the due date, penalty dates, so that staff can come back with that as well.
I think that would be very helpful.
So Councillor Brown could basically move that option, proceed forward, and have it seconded.
A move that the report contain that option? Is there a second?
Yes, I would move that.
Okay. Seconded, Councillor Martman. Any discussion on that? I just want to say, keep in mind, everyone, and frankly, I'm going to support this. I think it's the only appropriate thing to do. I think the province, by fixing the dates that they did, basically did what I hoped they were going to do, which is settle the property tax date, period, but by implication it does anyway. But do keep in mind that the delay of this will not impact on as many people as you think. Because if you have a mortgage, the vast majority of people pay their taxes as a portion of their mortgage. The lending institutions collect it and they pay it out on your behalf on or before the tax due date. So we are talking about those people who pay their taxes voluntarily. They may have a clear title house, they may have a house with a mortgage, some of them may, probably most won't. So it's not as much as a relief as we think it might be, but I agree with Councillor Brown that it is one way of recognizing that you don't want to add insult to injury. If you've lost your job or your business and then the property tax is due and you have to pay another 10% on top of that right away, it's a bit hurtful. Anything arising from that? Councillor Turley and Councillor Bonner have their electronic hands up.
Hang on a sec.
You're there.
I'm here. Okay, good. So the question I have, and I'm assuming it's related to the motion because I didn't hear the motion, but if we offer the option of the tax bill of having it delayed until October 1st for the 5% penalty kicks in and then the balance 5% on anything going over that, after that, could we also put in an option there that, if you pay a quarter of it on August 1st, another quarter on September 1st, or I should say the 3rd, that then the 5% is only on what the balance is owing at the time to make it, I guess I'm sounding a bit stupid, but...
Councillor Turley, the penalty is on the balance owing at the time.
I realize that. I realize that. But what I'm trying to do is emphasize that people are aware that if they pay monthly, the penalty at the end isn't as much. I don't know if that can be put on the tax bill as an option.
Through your worship, to Councillor Turley, there are limitations to our tax system, and quite frankly, just the tax penalty, allocating it to different classes is almost impossible. I'm not sure if we could do that at all. We could, if we could put on there, if you pay monthly, your penalty will only be what's outstanding at that due date.
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
Okay, yep. We can put a note on there, yeah.
Sure, okay, thanks.
Ms. Legan, before I go to Councillor Bonner.
Yeah, Your Worship, just to add to what Ms. Mercer is saying, that we plan to do some communication around this once approved. I believe that it will provide a measure of relief to those that are not used to not being able to come to City Hall to pay their taxes and are not comfortable with online options. So rather than a lot of pressure to all have it paid up on July 2nd, there will be some opportunity to smooth out the revenue coming into the city and for the city to be in a position to assist the property taxpayers with options to actually make their payments. And we can all appreciate which segments would have a difficulty getting it into the city, so we'll be putting together a communications plan around that and can add Councillor Turley's suggestions as well to that communique.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm quite in favor of the recommendations and the motion. I'm wondering if it's possible that we're able to set the rate of the penalty. So it could be October 1st, 2%, and then 8% at the second payment, correct?
Yeah, through your worship, yes, that's correct. There's no stipulation in the community charter or the regulation that says that it has to be 5 and 5. It can be 1 and 9, 2 and 8.
Okay. The other question is, do you anticipate any problems with the coming forward with the amount of money that people are going to be paying? Because I know that we have to pay Ian about $27 million in August.
For the sake of the record, he's referring to the regional district of Nanaimo.
Oh, darn.
Just took the smile off Councillor Thorpe's face. Or you don't put it on.
Through your worship, to Councillor Bonner, this is our cash flow, given the fact that we get to defer the school tax to the end of the year, we should be in good cash flow shape to have paid all those other governments out, including the regional district.
Okay, thanks for that. And finally, my original idea earlier, you don't get your check until you pay your taxes, so that'll help too.
Councillor Thorpe, and then did I see your hand, Councillor Hemmons? No, goes Councillor Thorpe, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, the regional district is looking forward to that payover, of course. I support the recommendation or the motion. I think it makes a lot of sense. But I would like to reiterate something that I think Councillor Brown made in his comments a little while back, and that is in our messaging. I think we need to encourage people that can pay their taxes on July 2nd to please do so, to increase and improve the city's tax flow situation. That's part of their civic duty. If you're able to pay, then please do so, and if you can't, then we're giving you a bit of a break. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Any further discussion on this? All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Thank you very much. Makes it easy for Ms. Curry. Thank you, Ms. Leggin, Ms. Mercer. We're on to what was formerly A is now D, parking operations. Ms. Leggin.
Thank you, Your Worship. We've renamed it Parking Fee Relief because we have provided background on parking operations, but wanted to be very specific about the revenue experience of the city with respect to parking operations since the presentation on April 9th, where we did present the April 3rd forecast with respect to revenue decreases, as well as expenditure avoidance and expenditure decreases as well, with the approximately $2.9 million shortfall. With the measure that we are putting forward today for Council's consideration, there will be a financial impact, and we wanted to make sure that you could reference the baseline that was presented on April 9th within the framework that showed the financial projection as of April 3rd, with the new information that's come forward, with the inability for us to collect parking revenues given the COVID situation and the shutdown of so many facilities, and the complete dearth of on-street parking. So we're making a recommendation that we believe is an equitable one, and will provide a measure of relief to the citizens of Nanaimo. And Ms. Mercer is going to go into detail for us.
Ms. Mercer.
Thank you, Your Worship. So as Ms. Leggin just referred to the framework that was presented on April 9th, included in those projections are the estimated impact on parking operations based on the information we had at that time. And since that time, we have received updated information as in regards to the impact on our parking operations. So what we found is that usage has decreased more than we had originally anticipated. So we originally anticipated that permits would be down about 10% and parking fees down about 50%. But what we found for both on-street and off-street parking are that parking fee revenue is down about 80% over the same time last year. And the trend continues to increase in April. So I'll draw your attention to attachment A, and it shows our original baseline projection showed the city would need funding from general revenue of approximately $32,000 if the health emergency persisted to the end of the year. So with the new information, we would need approximately $445,000 from general revenue if the health emergency persisted to the end of the year. So this assumption takes into account, I believe, permit revenue down 50%, 90% reduction in parking fees for March, and 95% down for April onwards. This also means that no money will be going to the parking reserve to fund future projects. So at some point, we're going to have funding issues for future parking projects. So any temporary relief that council gives will further increase the need for general revenue funding. So with that, the option that we've presented in the report is that council consider providing temporary relief to residents that would provide parking free for 3 hours on all metered on-street and off-street surface lots and parkades during the health emergency. So that would provide, we would still have parking permit revenue, but all on-street and off-street parking would be free for the first 3 hours and then payment on anything over that. So this change would have an estimated projection of needing $635,000 in general revenue funding if the health emergency persisted to the end of the year. So I'll turn it back to council to have a discussion on this topic.
Thank you very much. Councillors? No questions? Comments? Councillor Markman? You've got to unmute yourself, Councillor, otherwise you're a talking head, a non-talking head. Thank you.
Okay, so just to make sure I understand this correctly, so the free 3-hour parking, so if we were to start opening July 1st, let's say the best case scenario being the ever optimist, then the impact to us is the $375,000 or the 48?
Ms. Mercer.
Through your worship. If we were to give 3-hour parking, free 3-hour parking, and everything resumed as normal July 1st, there would be no impact.
It's a little bit. 187,000.
That's September 1st.
It's 48,000. Sorry.
So it's zero, no, 48,000 is the expense. So the amount we would need.
48,000, yeah.
No, so sorry, the report, so the graph is, so if you're looking at the 3-hour parking projection, free 3-hour parking projection, revenue decrease is 375 and expenditure savings are 48. The line indicates the amount of general revenue funding we would need. And if we reopened July 1st, we would need $0 from general revenue funding. If the facilities, if everything reopened and business as usual September 1st, we would need $187,000 of general revenue funding. And if it persisted till the end of the year, we would need $635,000 of general revenue funding.
Okay, so my question was, I was thinking that we wouldn't start to offer free 3-hour parking until the restrictions had been lifted. Is that, or is that not, we're just thinking of giving it now?
In other words, why give them the rate now when they're not using it?
Right.
Ms. Mercer?
Yeah, we had done the projection as if the parking was free for 3 hours now, not when everything reopened.
Because I don't think that the people will really see that as a benefit when they can't use it. They're like, oh, thank you for giving us nothing. So my suggestion is we should look at what it might look like when we're opening. Now we're able to offer you the 3 hours.
That's a very interesting suggestion. Councillor Brown, well, no, Councillor Turley and then Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Worship. So the concern I have about the 3-hour free parking is that it appears to also increase our expenses. I'm assuming because of extra patrolling, or just it seems to have gone from 65,000 to, if we go from in September to 82,000. And at the end of December, 113 to 150.
Those are expenditure savings.
Oh, expenditure savings, okay.
The blue is the revenue.
Not an expenditure increases, okay.
Yeah.
Ms. Lagan?
Your Worship, thank you. Just to explain the rationale behind the 3-hour parking concept, we were trying not to cannibalize the permit holders who are still paying. There are many organizations that still have a complement of staff who are paying their monthly permit, if we went with longer than 3-hour blocks, we would effectively be encouraging the permit holders to move out of the surface lots and parkades onto the street. We do believe that the permit holders who are attending work and paying are getting value. They are in covered or designated parking spaces for the convenience, and that is the rationale, so that we didn't have full cannibalization of revenues where we knew there was value being created and paid for by the permit holders who were actually parking close to their places of employment where they're attending.
But I wasn't looking at extending the 3 hours any longer than 3 hours. What I was looking at was not implementing the free 3-hour until the time that businesses are back being open again.
Ms. Mercer.
So we were just wanting to know, so if that was the case that council wanted us to model for you, what kind of time frame would you be looking at? Like 3 months? 4 months? What kind of time frame would you be looking at?
Well, I was looking at, just like the chart said, what does it look like if we start to offer, and I guess in a way it gives that, except for that we wouldn't have any free parking until July 1st, let's say. I personally think it's going to be June 1st, but July 1st, what would it be like if we gave three months? That's what I would be looking at. What does it look like after we open?
Ms. Lagan.
We can look at that. Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Martman, one of my concerns is that I'd like to go back to parking operations and understand how that disrupts the natural flow of parking, and will that actually create issues for us, particularly in the months of July and August with respect to 3-hour blocks of free parking where the flow might need to be more frequent than that depending on what the businesses are. So if it is a lunch hour business, yet people are parking 3 hours there, disrupting the flow of 15-minute blocks, I think we could have some unhappy or unintended consequences without talking to parking operations and truly understanding what that flow is. So I appreciate your comments, but I would like to go back and have that conversation with them as well.
Oh, I think I understand what you're saying. So what you were saying is implement free 3-hour parking now until businesses open.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
I believe it's Councillor Turley and then Councillor Brown.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to change my hand down.
Your hand's down. Councillor Brown, you're on.
Thank you, Worship. First thing, there is no such thing as free, especially parking at high cost. I'm feeling a little dense here because I'm not actually understanding why we're having this conversation and what it's set out to achieve. I've read the report, I've looked at it, and I don't understand why we're talking about providing free parking. And I almost like I need to be walked through this fully to understand. And I think, and to be honest, I think parking, the economics of parking is a pretty intense conversation that I'm not sure we're equipped to fully understand without going into it in a lot deeper detail.
Anyone want to respond?
Sure.
Mr. Rudolph.
I agree with Councillor Brown that the subject of parking is interesting, and it's even more interesting when we don't have any revenue being generated from the parking assumptions that we built into our budget. So if one of the news items that comes out of this particular report is that we have a significant shortfall of revenues coming from our parking, from both parking garages, permit holders, and our on-street parking, which in large part funds the balance of our bylaw enforcement function, is certainly a revenue challenge for us. As Mr. Smythe from the Chamber of Commerce has noted to us a couple of times, you can walk through the downtown of Nanaimo and not see too many cars at all parked on the street. So it is somewhat of an academic exercise, but to expect the staff to be policing something that's not actually happening is we'd actually want to encourage people to be parking in the downtown. It creates that environment. So I think the intent was originally, unfortunately, to report back to you that our revenues are down dramatically on our parking garages. The monthly permit holders have over 80% of them have withdrawn or canceled their monthly parking fees or permits, and the need for and any desire to achieve parking in our downtown on the streets is also dried up. So it's an unfortunate thing that we have to report. It's another revenue source that we've lost, or certainly significantly compromised. And in part, that was one of the major goals of this report, was to report back to you. So we'd actually like to encourage people to park down there, but not necessarily park for like days at a time on the street. So seeking, I guess, some sense of input from council about the whole subject matter is really what we were hoping to do here today. It wasn't necessarily a decision item.
Anyone other than Councillor Brown? Councillor Bonner, please, and then Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was kind of hoping we were doing this because so that people didn't have to put their fingers on our kiosk and buy a parking ticket. People would be downtown enough so that they wouldn't have to necessarily buy a parking ticket, and they wouldn't be down there for more than 3 hours. My question is, what does that graph look like if we increase our parking fees by 10%?
Increase fees or usage?
Are you talking about the actual rate we're charging, or we managed to get the revenue up by 10%?
No, I'm on the rate that we were charging once everything got all back together again. But,
so in other words, if we're charging 50 cents an hour today and we charge 55 cents next year, is that?
no, I mean, I'm looking at the graph, sorry, Your Worship, I'm looking at the graph of the blue area and the line that cuts through it, and this is how much we'd have to cover it. If we increased our parking fees by 10%, and we still have the 3 hour free as is going on right now, and what would that graph look like? Would the amount that we have to pay out of general revenue go down? I'm guessing it would.
Ms. Ligon.
Your Worship, to Councillor Bonner, it would be a minimal amount impacted because our parking revenues have dropped so significantly, so it's 10% on a much smaller piece of the pie, so it would be very minimal. We could do the analysis, but it would be very, very minimal.
Okay, I'm fine then, thanks.
And Councillor Turley, I believe.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the concern I have about offering 3 hours of free parking on the street is twofold. Number one, at some point in time, you're going to have to go back to charging again when this is all over. And people, once they've been used to paying for something, take it away and then try to put it back, generally are a little obstinate about it. And the second thing is, I realize that the usage of the parkades is probably pretty low right now, but would this not have the potential of dropping revenues to the parkades even lower?
Through Your Worship to Councillor Turley, the analysis included 3 hours of free parking in the parkade if you were paying hourly. So if the analysis is based on 3 hours free parking at on-street meters, at surface lots, as well as in the parkades where you're paying hourly for use of the parkade.
Okay, well, I guess I misread the appendix when it shows. Okay, that's fine. Then that makes sense. Thanks.
Anyone else? This is an information item. I must say that if I was inclined to give a break on parking, it would be once the virus is declared over and we gave people 3 free hours to encourage them to come back down and revitalize our downtown. It would probably be more important. Thank you very much, staff. You're getting a lot of tough and interesting scenarios and questions today. Your work is appreciated. The last item under the reports is city facility leasing and rental relief. Ms. Legan, once more.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is an information item that we had intended to bring back in a week with respect to it being a decision item. This is specific to the city facilities where we are closed and we have external parties who lease or rent space. They have no opportunity for revenue in those spaces as they are closed to the public. And we are suggesting that we provide leasing and rental relief to them consistent with if they are in our facility that is closed, as well as special consideration for our community services building. And I'll turn it over to Ms. Mercer.
Ms. Mercer, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Ms. Leggett kind of covered it all off. So in our 2020 budget, the city has budgeted about $988,000 for facility leasing and rental revenue. And of this budgeted amount, approximately $326,000 comes from facilities that have been closed or are severely impacted due to the province of BC health emergency. So consistent with the framework that was presented on April 9, Council is being asked to give consideration to those affected organizations and giving them temporary relief from their monthly lease and rent payments for the duration of the closure. So the potential estimated cost of this relief is approximately $245,000. And that's assuming that the rent relief would be from April 1st to December 31st. So what the idea is, once the health emergency order is lifted and businesses start to start up operations again, the first month of rent will be prorated depending on their start date. And so that's what we had for you for this, and we'll turn it back to you for discussion.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just for clarity, when you say that consideration will be given to the community services building, I'm thinking of, in particular, the 710 Club that is still operating, but is operating out of our facility. Will they be offered this rent relief because they're still operating?
Ms. Mercer.
Through Your Worship, yes, that would be one of the organizations that would get some rent relief, as we have estimated rent relief for all the renters in that building.
Okay, thank you very much.
Anyone else? Seeing none, again, an information item for further consideration. We've got a lot to chew on. All right, that completes the reports. We have no bylaws, no notices of motion. On to item 11, which is agenda planning. Ms. Curry.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Ms. Legan appreciates an opportunity not to have to go first.
So this report that's in front of you today is not unlike the agenda planning document that's on your Governance and Priorities Committee meetings, and it's for agenda planning purposes and looking for topics that Council had discussed as priorities for future meetings and discussing the meeting format for those meetings, etc. going forward. So today, because Council, some background to this item, Council on March 16th opted and passed a motion to put the committees and task forces on hold for the time being because of the pandemic, and staffing and resources and priorities at that time were ultimately 100% around COVID-19 and the pandemic. So today, before you, this report is in front of you in a way to transition back into some of the business Council was doing, giving you an opportunity to have a roundtable discussion, discuss your priorities that were on your list for Governance and Priorities Committee, discuss if they're still a priority. Some of priorities may have shifted because of COVID-19. So basically, just in a ease back into regular business, provide you the opportunity to have a roundtable discussion and discuss some of those items.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank Thank you, Your Worship. Just before we get into this, maybe it's just me, but I'm having a little bit of difficulty hearing Ms. Gurry clearly. So if others are sharing that concern, maybe to speak up or use a different microphone. Thank you.
Yeah, I couldn't understand her either.
Ms. Gurry's been sitting in the corner. Ms. Gurry's been sitting carefully in the corner doing the right thing, distancing, but she'll now take Ms. Ligon's hot seat.
I don't know if I can remember everything I said. Can you hear me now?
Very good, yeah.
Okay.
Repeat it if you want.
I won't repeat everything. Basically, the gist of it is, the report in front of you today is to provide you an opportunity to have a roundtable discussion amongst yourselves since the March 16th meeting when you've put all the task force and committees on hold. Kind of a way for you to discuss your priorities that you were going to bring to the Governance and Priorities Committee. Those may have changed since COVID-19, so you may have different priorities that you would like to bring back to special council meetings. You may want to discuss committees and task force that are on hold, and just in order to get back to some ordinance of regular business. So it's an opportunity for you to discuss priorities and what you would like to see coming forward from council, and to look at those topics you've previously discussed, see if any of them are still relevant at this point in time, and or you have other priorities you would like staff to work on. And Mr. Rudolph might have some
Your Worship, just to make it easy for council, maybe there's two parts to this, as Ms. Gurry said. The first part is to resurrect to deal with the motion that actually put all of our committees in abeyance. And we have brought back the Health and Housing Task Force, and there's a staff report coming next week. It was coincidental, but on the Economic Development Task Force, bringing that back. But finding a way to get back to business with all our task forces and committees, and getting, this is just sort of the place to talk about that a little bit and how that might look, and then sort of unpack those systematically beginning as, in the near future. So that's sort of, and maybe even revisit each of those briefly if you want. But there was the Environment Committee, there was the Committee on Inclusiveness and Accessibility, there was the Task Force on Economic Development, on Health and Housing. There's which is yet to be launched, a Task Force on Council Remuneration, and I'm not sure if I missed anything. There was the Finance and Audit Committee, and which is and maybe even transitioning from all special council meetings to more of a GPC and back to council every second week. So it's just all those things are there, and now we to be honest, it was reconstructing the past month or so. It just seemed like everything was 100% for the administration on COVID and anything around that, and all the changes that were happening so fast, and all the government news conferences and directives, and they still come out, and it's unfortunate they come out late Friday night sometime. So we're getting to a place we feel administratively that we're more stable, and we're suggesting to you that we're in a position now to reboot ourselves back, albeit in a different format, noting that we're in the middle of this health emergency. We even touched base, just to say this briefly, with ENBC last week, asking if we could stand our EOC down to level 1 virtually, and they said they did not recommend it. So that was a bit telling. So we have to remember that we have this health emergency going on as much as we're continuing to try to do our business. It does consume a fair amount of our staff time with our various departments at times. So having said that, we'd like to suggest to you that we're in a position to resurrect a modified version of our former self in terms of our committees and activities. And I'm assuming council is open to that, but it would have to be virtual and within the limitations that we have of being able to deliver that. And so some of the work is continued on behind the scenes, and then after that we can talk about the work plan and things like the OCP and things that you may have questions around, and then things that are more urgent because of COVID and that type of thing. So So there's just that whole piece, and then there was the topics to talk about a priority to you, either short-term or long-term. So back to the original piece, which was just on all those committees and having a sense of, okay, it's okay to bring back that in a way that's comfortable to council, and then secondly, get into the round table. Perhaps all members of council could do a sort of set of comments about where they think things are at and what their priorities are, and then that would be helpful, and then we could rebuild a new GPC agenda schedule for you.
Councillor Armstrong first, then Councillor Thorpe. Please.
I think we should be putting the council enumeration on hold. Right now, we've got people losing their jobs, and I don't think it's time for us to be looking at raises. So that's one that I would like to be putting on hold. Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe, and then Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I agree with Councillor Armstrong, and I was one who supported the notion of looking at council remuneration, but that's not going to be a priority for me as we move ahead. I would be in favor personally of trying to get us back to business as much as usual as possible, keeping in mind the comments of Mr. Rudolph, and I think this is going to be dependent on our staff capacity, always remembering that we have to focus on the COVID crisis that we're facing still, and I don't think we can overlook that and how much staff time and resources are consumed with that. So bearing that in mind, if staff feels that we can start to resurrect some of our other committees, I think the sooner the better, and if it's virtual, that's fine, but let's try and move in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hemmons, then Councillor Turley, and Councillor Armstrong. Do you want to come back, or just your hand's been left up? Thank you. So Councillor Hemmons, then Councillor Turley, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I also support a return to business as much as possible, paying close attention to staff capacity. I don't believe going forward with the task force on remuneration is tasteful right now. I also think as someone who is involved in committee work over kind of this new virtual reality, starting any new committees, I'm thinking about the accessibility and inclusion committee. Starting new committees would be really difficult at this time, but I absolutely support getting committees that were up and running and could adapt to this new technology because the relationships are there. Fully support those. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Turley, and then Councillor Bonner, and then Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Your Worship. My comment is to do with the Economic Development Task Force, and I only foresee one meeting prior to July, and that meeting would be focused on discussions with the consultant that we selected, and then they would be providing a review, the proposal sometime in July. So, and then after that it would be August and again in September. So I really think it's important to hold a meeting sometime between now and June to discuss things with you.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner, and then Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm in favor also of bringing forward some of the committees and getting them started back up again. If you ask me what I thought about future GPC topics, I've been very much inclined of moving forward our social procurement discussion. I know that we have a consultant on that, but I see that work as being pinnacle to helping our community and our economy grow again after this crisis. So I would like to see us have a conversation on that sooner than later if possible.
Thank you, Councillor. I agree with you. Councillor Martin.
And I concur with you too, Councillor Bonner. The accessibility committee has actually already had our first meeting, and it really, really went well. And if Councillor Armstrong's in agreement, I really think it is one of the committees we should bring back, because this is where we could really hear of things we don't think of how COVID has impacted those with different abilities, etc. So if the staff capacity is there, I'm all for bringing back the accessibility committee.
Councillor Turley again.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The one GPC item that think, depending on how quickly staff want to implement this, is the MOES version 13. I know there's a lot of people in the construction business that have concerns about it and probably want to get involved in the discussion about it and ask questions. And I just don't know how much capacity we have on Zoom to be able to have 10, 15 people making representations.
Thank you, Councillor Turley. Councillor Gesselbrock, and then Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Worship. Just one, voice my support for getting on the social procurement discussion. Second, I know we had on the GPT agenda sort of the second discussion on council advocacy around homelessness, addiction, social disorder. I think that just looking at how things are shaping up this year with the additional impacts of COVID, that you need to be quite proactive in this front and support the Health and Housing Task Force in the best way possible. With that discussion, so I'd like to see that happening, and then potentially this will be happening in additional. I'll pass on this. Thanks.
Before I go to Councillor Armstrong, Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. Possibly, seeing that everybody's in concurrence, maybe a motion to rescind the motion made on March 16th, or another motion could be created saying that task forces and committees be reestablished.
I'm going to let Councillor Armstrong speak, and then we'll move to the motion, potential motion. Councillor Armstrong?
Yeah, a couple of things. One, when it comes to the advocacy, I think it's really important now that we see the importance of proper treatment facilities for those with addictions and mental health. Because if those were in place, we probably wouldn't be having half the issues of trying to find the places to live and stuff, because they'd already be placed in the proper places. So I think it's something that the governments really need to look at. When it comes to the accessibility task force, certainly would be in favor of that, because I do think that there will be a lot of effects that we aren't thinking about because of the COVID for some of them, so support that. And then I will move the motion to reinstate the committees and task force.
Thank you very much. Is there a seconder?
Seconder.
Councillor Martman. Discussion on this. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I'll certainly support it, but I think, as was said before, maybe by me, with the caveat that it's going to hinge on having necessary technology if we're doing this virtually, and of course on staff capacity, and I'm always concerned about that, especially in this time of crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we work on the assumption that staff will tell us what they can deliver. Right. And we will, I won't say we'll march accordingly, but we'll certainly take direction. Any further discussion? Councillor Brown, please.
Yes, thank you, Worship. I do echo the caveats that both you and Councillor Thorpe highlighted there. The other one, I would just like to make sure that we have flexibility as things have settled a little bit, but I just want to voice support that if ever we need to cancel something that is a GPC, to have a council meeting to deal with emergent issues as the decision-making body. I would wholeheartedly support that, and I just want to make sure that we build that adaptability.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion? All those in favor, raise your hands. Any opposed? None. Thank you very much, everyone. Anything further in around agenda planning or general discussion today? Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Your Worship. Perhaps a little bit of council's priorities have already been noted, most notably social procurement and advocacy. So those two things were heard, but maybe you would like to go around the virtual table and see if there's any other priorities or...
I'm going to start with the table the way it would be if we were in a council chamber, and I'll start on my right, and we'll go to Councillor Turley first. Roundtable comments, anything you want to add?
Here we are, I'm on. Okay. Let me say, are you referring to GPC topics, or what are we talking about? Anything in general?
Anything in general.
In general.
Anything in general. No, I just think the decisions that hopefully will carry forward to Monday that we're talking about today will at least be a little bit of help for the community. And I think it's important that we continue to be in contact with people that we know to find out, kind of get a pulse of how things are really going on, so we're not just listing select people, shall we say, and make our decisions based on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turley. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I could add one more to add, I would probably add the one on transportation. And the reason being is a number of things have changed in our society, and we don't need to go back to the way it was. We can actually move forward and make changes based on how things have settled out in the last few months. I think the way we look at our transportation in our city is probably one of those. It's nice to have been able to walk down Bowen Road in the middle of the road and not being hit by a car for about a week or so. I do notice the traffic outside my house is increasing daily. But I would certainly think that we should be looking at transportation with the idea of a new norm as opposed to the old one. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. With respect to agenda planning, I think there's a couple things on there that we identified, like arts and culture and neighborhood associations, that would be really wonderful to have those conversations. But to me, the sort of forum that I think we've talked about and potentially imagined is a little more interactive with each other. So I wonder the ability to have those in the digital format and have the great attendees. So I really don't have anything to add. I think Councillor Bonner summed it up quite nicely on transportation, and that might be one that we can have might be well done on the Zoom format and materialize well if that's something council is interested in and we have staff capacity to do so. Again, I don't think we can have that conversation just as a city. I do think a key portion of transportation is also our bus system, and obviously the regional districts. We have to take into account their staff capacity as well, and you know, what transit staff. Do they have time to have a conversation with council on transit, or are they sort of deep in other duties? Because the COVID experience for transit is very real. There's a lot of issues there as well with some of the changes we've made, but I just don't know if they would have the time or capacity to meet with us and have that conversation.
Ms. Gurry, before I go to Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Worship. Yes, to Councillor Brown's point, staff have looked at some of the items such as arts and culture, and this isn't quite the forum that I think Council envisioned having that in, or the time. So those may be put off some months, maybe till after the summer or sooner if possible, when we can get people actually together and have the appropriate conversation around that for you folks to consider.
Councillor Brown?
Yeah, thank you, Worship. And that just sort of triggered another thought. Arts and culture might actually be a very different conversation now with respect to those organizations, their cash flow, some of their operations. We don't know the scene, and so some of that conversation might be very different from a couple months ago. So I don't know how we navigate that and maybe have that conversation, but I suspect there's going to be a large financial and operating component of that conversation.
Thank you very much. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't think I have much new to add. I think Councillor Brown is right, and I think a lot of our conversations are going to be a lot different now because of the situation that we're faced with and the economic fallout from that. In terms of transit, certainly we can find time for staff discussions, but I would suggest that would be better served down the road after we know more of the economic fallout on our transit system. As we're all aware, I think we're all aware, RDN is providing the service. We're getting zero revenue from it. BC Transit had also experienced a cut in their revenue even before the COVID crisis. So there's going to be some real challenges ahead with transit, and when maybe those are a little bit clearer would be a better time to have the conversation. But absolutely, we should have it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. I support much of what has been said so far. I'm really interested in discussing how to be an effective advocate, both as a council and how we weave that together with the Health and Housing Task Force. So I would personally like to see that conversation prioritized. My only other thought is around the neighborhood associations. I think right now as we're dealing with a global pandemic, us having regular channels of communication and understanding how these kind of groups of residents can help distribute messaging or support each other, et cetera, et cetera. Community networks are going to become more and more important. So I agree with Councillor Brown that the forum we had imagined for that conversation is probably inappropriate now. However, I think that conversation in general of how do we support those organizations that are supporting our residents is one of the most vital conversations we can be having right now. So I'm not sure what that means for format, but I'd like to see that be a priority on our conversation list. Thank you.
Ms. Goury.
Thank you, Worship. To Councillor Hemmons, it could be something we could utilize our Bang the Table, get involved in an IMO platform, and possibly do something around the neighborhoods. I think something was already planned with respect to the neighborhoods associations with Bang the Table. So I can let you know how that's working, and maybe that's some way we could engage or get them involved and reach out to them that way.
Thank you. If I may, Your Worship, another conversation that I think we should have is an update on where we stand with the OCP. And this just reminded me of, because the neighborhood associations, I think, are probably, if we use them well, are going to be fundamental to that, the development of that new plan.
Very good. Well said. Councillor Gesselrock.
Thank you, Worship. I think the train's going by right now.
We're going to get on board, Councillor. Don't worry. We're going to get on board.
I think this whole COVID-19 and all the measures put in place have, one, it's exposed some vulnerabilities, in our city systems, and it's also shifted habits of people. And it's amazing actually seeing, at least in my neighborhood, around the amount of people walking, riding their bikes, out just in the neighborhood, conversing with one another. Also just looking at how much we started to use digital technology for meetings, and I think that it'd be interesting to have a conversation of what opportunities, because we've had to adapt and shift, how can we incorporate new things that we've learned in how we do business in the long term that may improve, our greenhouse gas emissions or our efficiency as a council. And I think that conversation would be interesting, because you rarely get an opportunity like this where we've had to undergo such a big shift. So I think these round table would be interesting, but unpacking that. So areas that have already been brought up are around transportation, active transportation. Would be interesting to look at, and then the use of digital technologies. And then also, I like the concept of harnessing the neighborhood associations in a way, especially during times like this, but how they can be used to further strengthen the resiliency and the communication of the city to different groups. So I think the priorities that we've talked about already around our advocacy strategy and that have already been mentioned, so those would be the ones I'm keenly focused on, but then furthering the conversation on others. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Markman.
Well, thank you. I think most of the councillors have already spoken of some great ideas, and I'm on board. So I'll just take this opportunity. I really thank the staff and senior management and everybody, because I think they're really doing the heaviest lift interesting in all of this. And I'm really appreciative of the reports we're getting. I'm appreciative of the chamber and the work that they're doing. And I think there's room for optimism, and hopefully this all ends sooner than later. But the one thing I will stress is the neighborhood association, and I know we were going to have a meeting, it was canceled because of COVID, but really I was going to go to the neighborhood association's meeting, but maybe we could just have one representative of the neighborhood association that would be able to attend a GPC. And from my understanding of Lou, there is really no limit to the number. She just might not see everybody on the screen. So that was my understanding. Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
First of all, I just want to offer my condolences to everybody in Nova Scotia for the tragedy that's unfolded and continues with more bodies being found today, and to our local RCP detachment who are quite impacted by it as well. And then I also want to thank our staff and previous council for leaving us in a much better economic situation than many other cities are in. So the fact that we've always had some good asset management, good reserves, has left us in a much better financial position, than we see Vancouver and those who are on the verge of bankruptcy. So I just really want to thank previous staff members and councils for leaving us in a great spot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Armstrong, and I'm going to start where you finished. I can tell everyone that the flags at City Hall were lowered today to half-mast. This is not the Canada that some of us older members of council remember. This kind of mass murder without any explanation or understanding of how this happens is not part of what we grew up believing this country was about. It was something we associated with our friends south of the border. And I appreciate that the RCMP are a large family in this country. And a symbol of what this nation has been about, peace, order, and good government. That is the basic on which this country is founded. And when we see this kind of inexplicable murder of so many absolutely innocent people take place, it is hard for us to understand that it offends the natural sense of well-being that comes with being a Canadian, a peaceful nation, a peaceful kingdom in a world that's often characterized by war and revolution and terrorism. Having said that, when you add what happened in Nova Scotia onto what every Canadian faces today with the pandemic, these are difficult times, and as I have said over and over again with the encouragement and support of council during my sometimes more than weekly messages, this is a time to respect and remember and be kind to one another and be supportive. And when you feel like letting your emotions go of a negative nature, try and restrain them. You never know what any human being is carrying with them that day and what burdens they may bear. Having said all that, I want to express my thanks as well to senior staff as they prepare us for what will be the difficult decisions. I appreciate that there's not a member of council who took this job on expecting this was going to be some interesting 4 years where everything was bright in Nanaimo and we turned a corner, it was going to be an easy job. I don't think anyone signed on for that. I want to recognize the compassion expressed by Councillor Bonner today and the frustration by him and many others about what instruments we have available to us to help our fellow citizens here in Nanaimo and the businesses they operate and everyone else who has been victimized by something that, well, literally 4 months ago none of us would ever have contemplated. It was simply not on anyone's radar. And here we are now struggling with a collapse of many businesses, a significant reduction in our gross domestic product, the health of people we love threatened by something which is not beyond our control. The world is reacting, but these are challenging and difficult times, and I just want to pay my respects to each and every member of council who today in their own way has reflected their natural compassion and empathy with the community, and for the staff for stepping forward and giving us options in our rather limited toolbox to do what the best we can for our citizens. If there's any response to this, please speak now, otherwise I will call for a motion for adjournment. Thank you very much, everyone. Motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Moved Councillor Martin, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Thank you very much.
Hey, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good weekend or week.